Okay, Alexander, we need to talk about the interview between George Stephanopoulos and President Biden for ABC News. Stephanopoulos, if people remember, our viewers remember that Stephanopoulos was the one that had that staged interview, that scripted interview with Biden, and the whole Putin is a killer line. So they trotted out Stephanopoulos once again to, I guess, what they thought would be to provide cover for Biden. But once again, Stephanopoulos, he didn't really dig too deep into the Afghanistan thing, even though it's the biggest story in the world right now, bar none. The questions, which were softball questions on Afghanistan, Biden blew a gasket and he completely messed up. The most striking mess up was the question, which, once again, I'm sure it was scripted. I'm sure it was rehearsed. I'm sure the Biden White House had all the questions ahead of time. Basically, Stephanopoulos asked him about the Afghans falling from the plane. And Biden he lost it. He said, that was 4 days ago, 5 days ago. He said, no, Mr. President, that was 2 days ago, 5 days ago. What is he talking about? I mean, it looked terrible. And then Biden said, and I quote, no, I don't think it could have been handled in a way that we're going to go back in hindsight and look, but the idea that somehow, and I'm reading the transcript and it's so difficult to read the transcript when asked about Afghanistan and the Afghans falling, Alexander, that, I mean, I read it and it doesn't make sense. And that's how it came out from Biden as well, broken and disjointed and confused and defensive. I mean, Biden was upset and he was defensive. And he said the idea that somehow there's a way to have gotten out without chaos ensuing, I don't know how that happens. You're the president of the United States, and when pressed about Afghanistan and the people falling from the plane and whether you handled the situation well, softball questions. One of his responses was, I don't know how that happens. If you don't know how that happens, who knows how that happens? That would be my follow-up question. Obviously, Stephanopoulos didn't. Like I said, he didn't really dig into it, which a good interviewer, a good journalist would have really dug into Afghanistan. Anyway, Alexander, I'll just repeat what I said. Scripted questions. I'm sure they had everything pre-planned, pre-prepared, and you got an absolutely terrible outcome.
Well, this is clearly an interview that was cobbled together in some haste in order to make up for the damage that extraordinary speech that he gave a few days ago has created. You remember he gave this awful address at the White House, turning his back on the journalists, blaming everybody for his own mistakes and refusing to take any responsibility, even while saying absurdly that the buck stopped with him. And that caused a lot of damage and a very angry backlash. By the way, a very angry backlash in Europe too. And of course, things have turned out very badly wrong at the airport. So somebody said, let's get the president in front of the friendliest possible interviewer. You could almost call him a member of the court, of the White House court. He's practically, let's face it, almost a member of the administration of the Democratic Party. You stage this interview with him. You get all the questions prepared, and you ask the president questions which he can easily field and answer, and that will repair some of the damage. The problem is the events in Afghanistan are so terrible and so awful that it's almost impossible to repair the damage. And in fact, what happened, instead of repairing the damage, we see the president again doubling down on many of the same mistakes that he made over the course of that address, which he gave in the White House a few days ago. So once again, he blames everyone else. Once again, he says nothing could have been done differently. He comes along and says, well, chaos happens, and, I'm not responsible for the chaos. And he also says that nobody could have predicted that the Afghan army would disintegrate in the way that it did. Nobody could have predicted it except presumably two guys doing a program on the Duran where we predicted it at great length and discussed it many times in many programs. We didn't perhaps get all the timing exactly right, because how could we? But we could see it coming. But the President of the United States, briefed by the great intelligence community of the United States, he couldn't see it. So, I mean, that is an absurd thing. So the result is an aimless, defensive president who wants to move as soon as he can onto what he sees as safer topics, like, the pandemic and all that, and who's unable really to answer questions in any kind of coherent way. Now, I'm going to answer one very simple and one very straightforward point that Biden made. He says, how could it have been done differently? Well, actually, we have an example of how it was done differently. How it was done differently back in the 1980s when the Soviet Union pulled its troops out of Afghanistan. Obviously, it had many, many, many more of them than the United States did, but this is what the Soviets did. They carried out a long negotiation with the Mujahideen and its various international backers in Geneva. They negotiated an agreement with the people there, which, by the way, Trump also did, but which Biden tore up. But that was a clear negotiation. The agreement, part of that agreement, was that there would not be any kind of offensive whilst the Soviet troops left. They left over an extended period. They left some of their equipment intentionally behind in order to re-equip the Afghan army, but they withdrew most of it. They managed to get all of their people out. They did it openly in an organized and regulated way, with their flags flying, with military bands, making it a carefully organized and properly run withdrawal, with their foreign minister at the time, Edward Shevardnadze, visiting the country, speaking to the people, talking with the president of the country. In other words, they engaged with the enemy, they engaged with the regional powers, they talked to the Afghan government, they didn't leave in the way that the United States did, like a thief in the night. They didn't abandon bases without telling anybody in the government. The United States left creating chaos. The President of the United States coming round now and saying that chaos was inevitable in this process is simply, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And what he's saying is simply not true. It could have been done differently. It was done differently once before in the 1980s. And when he became president, there was a pathway to doing it in an orderly and systematic and organized way. Again, there for him, on the table, negotiated by his predecessor. So he authored this calamity, no one else. And these attempts by him to try to get away from responsibility and to park it on other people is an absurd one.
Yeah, it was incredible to watch, but not surprising that they trotted out Stephanopoulos to give him these softball questions. And it was a complete failure. Yes. And I'm just thinking to myself, is there any resuscitation of Biden? Is there any way to resuscitate this situation, or is he as lame a duck a president as we've ever seen? I mean. I don't see him coming back from this, and I don't see anyone wanting to bring him back, which is even more interesting.
I didn't see him coming back, and I'm going to say something else. I mean, what is incredibly striking, and I really want to emphasize this again, is two things. First, the chaos continues. I mean, that business that you mentioned about, the people falling off the plane happening only 2 days ago. The situation in the airport remains terrible. there is still chaos there. There are still people struggling to get onto the planes. There is still confusion about the processing of the people who are getting onto the planes. There is still no real organisation and structure at the airport as we are speaking. And I'm getting reports that most of those planes are now leaving the airport either half empty or entirely empty because nobody's organising this evacuation properly. And of course, the United States has completely lost track of all its people across Afghanistan. And we had the Defense Department actually saying that the United States, the mighty United States, the world's most powerful country, cannot provide protection, cannot guarantee protection across Afghanistan to its own citizens. So the chaos continues. But where in this situation is the Vice President? Where is the Secretary of State? Where is the Defense Secretary? Who is in charge as of now at Kabul Airport? Why doesn't somebody senior go to Kabul Airport to take charge there? Why doesn't the President order anybody who's senior to take charge at Kabul Airport? What I am hearing are stories that the Vice President, Kamala Harris, is apparently shouting at people that she will not be associated with this debacle and she doesn't want to be involved. And we see absolute silence from all of the rest of the cabinet, even as the whole thing spirals out of control. The only defenders that I am seeing of the way the President has handled this are certain people who are, if you like, the ultra-loyalists who remain in the media, the media in the United States. And, I mean, the President has lost his grip, and the rest of the government, the rest of the administration, is absent without leave. I mean, it is an extraordinary performance. I could never have believed it. I mean, people go back and talk about Hurricane Katrina. You remember what happened at Hurricane Katrina and how the George W. Bush administration got justifiably criticised for some of the things that took place there. But there were the officials in charge. There was the head of Homeland Security. I can't remember his name. Maybe he didn't do a great job, but he was visible. He was there. The people went there. They tried to take charge. And within a couple of days, some sort of order was established. And it did seem as if the government and the president were working in harness together. There is nobody here. Or 9/11. Do you remember 9/11? How there was the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani. Of course, we don't like to talk about him anymore for all kinds of reasons. But he was there. He was there on the scene. He was pounding the telephones, talking to people, going on the radio, speaking on the television. He was visibly in charge. This time, there is no one in charge. All we have is the president saying, well, stuff happens, chaos takes place, it's nothing to do with me, no one could have done better, everything turned out as it had to turn out because, well, it couldn't have been done any other way. I mean, it's a terrible performance. And if I was an American, I would be asking some very serious questions about how my government is being run.
Well, yeah, at a minimum. Yeah, Katrina, Bush got crushed for that. Rightly so. Rightly so. He got demolished for the way he handled Katrina. But at the end of the day, they kind of got their act together, I guess. And 9/11, okay, well, Rudy Giuliani became America's mayor, and we all know the story of Giuliani. 15, 20 years later. What they've done to him and his reputation. At one point in time, though, he was the most popular mayor, if not the most popular politician in America.
Absolutely.
So, it's really interesting. On a side note, once again, Stephanopoulos, who is a Clinton loyalist and part of the Clinton camp, once again, I go back and I wonder if trotting out Stephanopoulos to do this softball interview is once again reflective of the Clinton camp trying to hold on to some sort of power in the White House as they duke it out with the Obama camp. And the Obama camp obviously is, at least in my opinion, is Kamala Harris, and she's lashing out at Biden, told to do so, I'm sure. And I'm sure her rants about Biden, I'm not going to get stuck with this shit that she said. That's like that's actually a quote that they're floating around. I'm sure that was leaked. Yeah, that was not, that was leaked on purpose. There's no doubt about that either. Whether she said that or not, she probably didn't even say that. But the Obama camp, they're creating the narrative of Kamala and an inept Biden, and maybe Stephanopoulos is the Clinton camp trying to save him because maybe Biden is easy for the Clinton camp to manipulate. Anyway, just a thought there, because Stephanopoulos is without a doubt a Clinton, insider. He's like part of the family.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all. But look, just consider what we're seeing at the moment in the United States. Are we seeing the members of the government fanning out, going on to the TV shows, talking, pounding the studios, defending the president, speaking up for the president? Really? It's as if the old man is being left hanging out to dry. And your point earlier in the program, is this the beginning of the end? Well, it seems to me the answer to that question has to be yes. And it also suggests to me one of two things. Either these people know that the end is coming and they don't want to be associated with it because they're looking beyond him. They're looking further at, what comes after, and they're all maneuvering for position. And maybe the Clintonites are trying to keep him in place as they try to find some way of counterbalancing, the Obamaites. And maybe there's that. Or maybe, and it seems to me completely discounted, maybe there's a general understanding across the government or the Democratic Party that maybe the old man is now irretrievably damaged goods and we're not supporting him because we're already working hard to find a way for a graceful exit. Because I can't see how he can come back from this. The fact that the Taliban took over Afghanistan, I think that was inevitable. I think when the US left, sooner or later, it was bound to happen. The way it's happened has been a disaster, and the way the response to that disaster has been handled in political terms is an even greater disaster. There doesn't seem to be any kind of explanation for this other than either a total vacuum and chaos of power at the top and deep factionalization, or perhaps the alternative, a quiet agreement across the government, the Democratic Party, the political system, that the old man has to go. So let him say a few things, and then you can attach it all on him and think of a way over the next few weeks and months to engineer a graceful exit, because I can't really see any other explanation for this.
Well, everyone knew that Biden was on his way out sooner or later, whether it was in 4 years and he was actually going to fulfill his first term, or whether it was by the midterms. The question that everyone was asking is how and who. How are they going to exit him, and who's going to take his place, especially given what we've seen of Kamala? And I think, we're going to get those answers very, very soon, sooner rather than later. The question has always been, how are they going to make him exit? Maybe this is it. Maybe this is how they're going to begin the process. Some people said it's going to be Hunter. Some people said it's going to be his age. Other people said it was going to be something else. At the end of the day, it may be Afghanistan that may be his undoing. But my mind, hearing you talk about the airport, my mind just keeps on sitting on Bagram Airfield. It just sits there. And to me, that tells me that, yes, this is chaotic. Yes, the Taliban was bound to cause trouble in the country, take it over so quickly, and in the way they did, I don't know. I'm sure the U.S., if they really wanted to, they would make sure that the Taliban did not take over the country in such a manner or delay it many, many, many years if they had the will. I mean, if they really had the will, then the U.S. would do whatever they could to hold on to Afghanistan. Obviously, they don't. They don't have the will. They didn't have the will. But the Bagram Airfield, to me, is the red flag. Something tells me that that decision to leave that airfield in the middle of the night was the setup. That was the setup, because I can't in a million years believe that Lloyd Austin, the Pentagon, military officials would not understand that if there's one thing you secure in an evacuation, it's the airports that you control. It is the most common of things. It's the most basic thing. You hold on to the airport and the troops. That's what leaves last. This is stuff that these guys probably got taught in military school and university. So something does not add up with the chaos. I'm not saying, all of this has been engineered or anything. My point is that maybe, just maybe, they made some interesting decisions like emptying out that airfield to kind of nudge the chaos that they knew was going to come sooner or later, but just kind of nudge the chaos along and put the poo-poo right in place for Biden to step on it. Maybe.
I mean, can I just say, nothing any longer would surprise me. Bear in mind, I was, working hard last night trying to find the name of the senior military officer at Kabul airport. Who is the senior military officer in Kabul airport? I can't find the name of that person anywhere. Presumably there is such a person, but I have no idea who he is. I have no idea how that astonishing decision to evacuate Bagram Air Base in the middle of the night without telling anybody, even the Afghan government, about it. I have no idea how that decision was taken. What I will say is this: if that decision was made as part of a factional battle within the administration, in other words, that Bagram was deliberately evacuated in order to sow chaos within Afghanistan, in order to try and achieve some objective in Washington, or indeed some objective of Afghanistan itself, then we are at the end when it comes to the United States, or at least its international role. Because that is how empires end. When factional battles at the center become so all-encompassing, so all-engrossing, that the center is no longer able to project orderly actions at the periphery. It would mean that the US government is now so dysfunctional, so chaotic, so unable, because of the political infighting that is going on there, to make any kind of coherent decisions. Even those, and if it is making decisions to create chaos in Afghanistan itself, then that is an even worse testament of what the US government is up to, because it would suggest again that the United States government, instead of being a force for order around the world, which would ultimately attract support to it, has become an agent of chaos around the world, which of course will set most people in opposition to it. So we would be, in that case, if that was done in that way, very much in an end of empire moment. Now, the other possibility is that this is just another example of a government that is completely dysfunctional, of a power vacuum in Washington, of nobody wanting to take responsibility, of nobody making the decisions, of General Miller and General Austin at the Pentagon no longer, not hardly bothering to look at what's going on in Afghanistan, and delegating decisions of this enormous importance to far more junior officials, far down the chain of command, who simply take operational decisions without considering the greater consequences. Certainly, holding on to Bagram until almost the end ought to have been the absolute imperative. Anybody with two grey cells to rub together, looking at the situation in Afghanistan as a whole, should have been able to see it. And the fact that it wasn't done begs so many questions that one absolutely needs to know the answers. There ought to be a full public inquiry and investigation as to what happened. But of course, as we know, inquiries and investigations that are meaningful no longer take place in Washington.
Do you know, Alexandra, that the distance from Kabul to Bagram Airfield is 62 kilometers by road? In other words, it's about a 50-minute drive. I'm looking at it right now. For all intents and purposes, it's located in Kabul or on the outskirts of Kabul, for that matter. Could someone say that leaving overnight the way they did is proof to the fact that someone was looking to poison the well and to screw up the evacuation process? I mean, can't you make that argument? Because can't you say that if it was, say, junior staff or if it was incompetence, then why would they just do it so quickly and so much in secret and just so, like just snap of the fingers, we're out, and not even tell the Afghan government? That's what bothers me as well. It's not only the fact that they abandoned that airport, they did it in such a sneaky, quick way overnight that just leaves me wondering if it was incompetence. I would say, okay, these guys maybe it was some junior military officials in the Pentagon, and they said, you know what, the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to offload the Bagram Airfield, and we'll concentrate everything in the Kabul airport, in one airport. I would imagine that if they were to say that, you would probably have a bunch of people, including people in Congress, if this idea was floated around, that would say, no, look, that's a dumb idea. At least hold on to the airfield as we perform this new September 11 timetable evacuation. At least hold on to the Bagram Airfield. You dumb junior analysts, go back to your office and be quiet. I imagine someone would get something like that type of pushback. But the fact that it was so secret, so quick, without any warning to anyone, not even the Afghan army, the Afghan officials, just leads me to wonder that someone was deliberately poisoning the well. It's like they were screwing up the supply chain, the whole process. Right. That's how it seems.
Right. Now there's two possibilities there. Firstly, that this was taken actually at a level of somebody who knew exactly what they were doing, and that they quit the airbase at Bagram and they did various other things precisely because they wanted to discredit the whole idea of the pullout. Perhaps were still hoping that it might be reversed. Who knows what? Now, if that was the intention and somebody did that, then I come back to what I said before. We are at an end of empire moment, because it would mean that some very senior official was plotting to undermine the policies of the United States and did so in a way that threatened dire consequences for the United States. In other words, factional infighting in the United States has now spilled over to the point where it is contaminating key decision-making and key organizational decisions made in the periphery, the peripheral regions far away from Washington, in the face of the enemy. And that is a terrible thing. And that suggests, as I said, that the US government is no longer functioning efficiently anymore. That is one possibility. The other possibility, and I'm not saying I favour this possibility over the first. I mean, I just don't know. But the other possibility is that somebody, Austin, Miller, they didn't want to have anything to do with this. So they delegated this job to some colonel or other, who was then sent in to make the decisions. This person really doesn't know very much about Afghanistan. Perhaps he hasn't even served there. Perhaps he doesn't know who the important people in the Afghan government or even the US embassy are. So he just saw this thing as an operational job. He had to take the people out. He took them out at night. He didn't think to consult anybody or inform anybody because as far as he was concerned, he was simply carrying out the instructions he was being given to try and close down all the various assets in Kabul, the instructions he was getting from the Pentagon. And in a way, actually, that's worse, because if that is the level at which decisions of this importance are being made, it's further proof that the US government is not functioning. When the Soviets decided to pull out of Afghanistan, they sent one of their top 4 stars. I even remember his name. He was called Boris Gromov, and he was the general in command of the Russian army. He was very visible. He was all over the place, as I remember. And he was one of the very last people, by the way, right at the very end, to leave. He was one of the last people to cross the border, making sure that all the troops had left, that nobody and nothing had been left behind. And he was visibly in control and in charge. And as I said, he was a rising 4-star. And there isn't any sign that the United States has anyone of equivalent rank in Afghanistan at the moment. And by the way, there are 44 4-stars in the US military. They could certainly have spared one.
I'm stuck on this, and we'll wrap up the video. Alexander, I did a search right now, Business Insider, the first result that came up. Photos. U.S. troops left behind everything, from energy drinks to armored vehicles, when they abandoned a key base in Afghanistan in the dead of the night. U.S. forces departed Bagram Airfield, a major base in Afghanistan, at 3 a.m. on Friday. They left behind numerous items, from energy drinks to MREs to armored vehicles, the AP reported. When U.S. forces left, they cut off the power. Then looters rolled in, grabbing what they could. Looters, Taliban. Once again, if you're looking to close down shop, don't you at least take the furniture and take the cash register and take the stuff with you? I mean, you just abandoned everything. I'm stuck on this because it just doesn't add up. It doesn't freaking add up. Why would you leave everything there? Well, unless maybe you also wanted, on the flip side, maybe you can make the argument that not only did you want to poison the well and sow some chaos into the mix, maybe you also wanted to embolden the opposition, because what does the opposition see? Number one, they see an airfield of the United States of America abandoned. Wow. Number two, they walk in there and they see all the goodies there. Everything's there. Energy drinks. Not my words. The AP's words, Business Insider's words, energy drinks to armored vehicles. You say, gee, this is incredible. Let's go for it. Let's take Kabul, everybody. Forward. Yeah.
I mean, can I just say, Alex, I mean, we don't know the answers to these questions because we don't have the information to answer them. But, you know, if somebody was doing those sort of things, if they abandoned Bagram in that way on purpose to achieve some kind of objective, then that is borderline treason. I mean, you have to investigate it, but they never will.
The bottleneck you're talking about, I agree, and it goes back to your previous point, which is what you're seeing at the airport right now. If you're looking at this from a business standpoint, you have a bottleneck here, and that bottleneck has occurred because you shut down a key plant, a key airfield, a key component to your business, whatever it is. If you're sitting there and you're the president, or if you're the CEO of a company or whatever, you sit there and you say to your people, you idiot, we're stuck here. Our supply chain is stuck. It's bottlenecked here. We can't process 10,000, 80,000 people, whatever it is. Our planes are now leaving empty. Everything's a mess because you dummies, you shut down that place over there. Why? Why did you do it?
Well, why did you do it? I mean, as I said, I don't know the answer. And either it was grotesque negligence or it was insubordination almost to the level of treason. I'm not coming down on one or the other because I just don't have the information. But whichever it was, obviously, the American people, the world, needs to know. And so does the US government, to make sure that this thing doesn't happen again. And we're not going to see that happening because, well, you saw the kind of performance. The person who ought to be setting up that investigation, the person who ought to be asking the questions, the person who ought to be calling in Austin and Miller and all the others. We saw the kind of performance he put on when he spoke to George Stephanopoulos. This is not somebody who is capable of taking charge. By the way, I very much like your point about business. I had to do, in my previous life, I did an awful lot of work liquidating companies. I mean, I was actually very heavily involved in that. I advised administrators and liquidators, and we would close down companies. And we would do this in a very orderly way. So we would work out what needed to be done in order to liquidate that company in a way that did the least damage, both to the underlying business and to the customers and to the creditors and to the employees. So we would close down those parts of the business which were losing money. We would sell off various assets. We would have a plan. We'd actually have a plan to do it in a structured way. And we did it. I mean, I can remember we always were able to do it successfully over a certain period of time. And it ought to have been exactly the same with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. You don't set out to liquidate an enterprise by extinguishing right at the start the core part of the business. I mean, that's fundamental. It's basic, because then all the other bits fall and collapse like the branches of a tree whose trunk has been chopped. I mean, that's absolutely obvious. But that's what they did. They closed down Bagram first, and of course everything else has just, as a result, come crashing down. And they don't even know where most of their people across Afghanistan are. And they're now coming out and saying, the DOD is now saying, well, we can't absolutely guarantee their protection. I mean, it is unbelievable. I mean, I've never known anything like this. Saigon was an orderly withdrawal by comparison. I mean, there is no comparison with this.
Look, 10,000 people, 40,000 people, 80,000 people, they're not getting out.
No.
Or they're not going to get out easily. And they're not going to get out with the help of the Biden administration. How they're going to get out now, and you're right, the Pentagon, the Biden administration has told them, in so many words, they've said, find your own way out.
Well,
it's really what they have told them. Yeah, just find a way out, everybody.
Yeah, the president has washed his hands of them. I mean, he goes on to this interview with George Stephanopoulos. Does he say to George Stephanopoulos, we're absolutely determined to sort this all out? Yes, he did say we're going to stay there as long as we can to make sure that everybody leaves. But what is he actually doing? And does he propose to keep the people, the troops in Kabul airport there indefinitely, even as the planes are leaving empty? Well, of course not. As I said, there's no real plan. There's no real organisation. He doesn't go along to say to George Stephanopoulos, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk to the Taliban. We're going to give them all kinds of warnings that no American lives must be put at risk. And if they are, there will be the most terrifying consequences for those people who do that individually. And we have their names and addresses. I'm sorry to put it in that kind of crude way, but sometimes that's what you have to do. There was nothing like that. It was just vacant, aimless, meandering, incoherent stuff. And as I said, the people on the ground who are in charge are invisible. We don't know who they are. We don't know their names. We don't know what rank they hold. We don't know how decisions are being made. We don't know what the Pentagon leadership is doing. And the entire cabinet has gone AWOL, as we say in England, absent without leave. And the vice president says that she doesn't want to have anything to do with this.
Well, the Taliban has already told the Biden White House, they've already said, you guys better get out by August 31st. So they've got 11 days. To process what? 50,000 people? 40,000 people? How are you going to do that?
Well, Alex, think about that. This is the United States of America, and it's now being given deadlines by the Taliban. I mean, could you have believed this a year ago? That the Taliban would be setting the clocks and saying, you've got to finish all this by the 31st of August. I mean, a real president, a real administration, confronted with something like that, would have told the Taliban, you get stuffed. We're going to stay here until we've got all our people out. And by the way, you're going to help us find them. And you're going to give them all the protection that they need. And if a hair of the heads of these people is affected, well, you know, there'll be the most terrible consequences for you. So, I mean, the Taliban are now dictating the timetable. I mean, the Taliban are giving the instructions that the United States is not giving. I mean, who would have believed this?
So I want you to talk a little bit about the effects this is having on the U.S. and the economy. Actually, we're going to do two videos, but I'll just break this up into two parts because we're kind of flowing nicely now. So we'll have one part, and then I'll put up a second part on this. And we're going to talk. I want you to talk a little bit about how this is affecting the U.S. in a domestic manner, but to kind of segue into that. Yuri Bezmenov, and I talk about him a lot, sometimes in many videos, he said the first stage to upend a country, an empire, whatever it is, as a KGB agent that he was, said the first stage is always the demoralization stage. Said it takes about 15 to 20 years to achieve pure demoralization. Brainwashing, demoralization, belief that your country is not what it used to be, that your empire is not what it used to be. We are knee-deep in the demoralization phase, aren't we?